Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good middle of the night to you, wherever you may be. It is Thursday, the 5th of October, 2023, it's 7 o'clock, and it's time for Paul English Live. Hello and welcome. It's the fifth one of these. The whole month of September's flown by, and it's taken a few weeks to get into a stride, and still polishing up a few bits, but got quite a few things for you tonight over the next couple of hours. Take a brief look at Cowboys and cowboy pictures, not cinema, images, and the French Revolution, and Germany, and communism. And where would a modern radio show be without a brief mention of Klaus? Look at the size of my Filtrum Schwab. We'll talk very briefly about that happy little chump. And I'm still looking for an extra pair of hands, you know. It's two arms and 8 fingers and 2 thumbs are not enough, frankly. I keep finding the start of these things bewildering. I've got too many screens, not enough arms, and but anyway, I think everything's looking okay. So you know, we have to check this kind of stuff in the wonderful world of internet web radio and all that kind of stuff. So quite a few things to go through today, I hope. I got an announcement to make at the end of the first hour, the beginning of the second hour, which is quite exciting. It is for me anyway, and hopefully for a few others as well. So I'm quite looking forward to bringing that up in about an hour's time. And we got a few clips and a few songs and some dancing girls and all that kind of stuff. I thought I'd start off anyway today, and I've got to just go and load it up and just have a look at this. I thought I'd just have a quick mention about the image for this show. I mentioned there in the roll through right at the beginning that we'd be looking at cowboy pictures. And if you've seen the screen, you will notice that we have an absolutely marvelous image of 2 cowboys under the moon. And I wanted to just bring the artist to your attention. He's called Mark Maggiore. And my son, I think my son brought him to my attention, or did I do it the other way around? It's always a bit difficult with this because we've always trying to claim bragging rights in the house about who found things first. But I want to give you a little bit of his bio very briefly, just the beginning, just talk about great pictures. By the way, the theme of the show is not really about cowboys at all. And the pictures are selected based on how much time there is available before the show and also what might look good. And sometimes it might spark us off into a theme and other times it might not. Today's not necessarily the day of it being a cowboy theme, although we could look at it later on, particularly the period after the US so-called Civil War. I think that might be worth a look at some point. But let me just tell you a little bit about Maggiore, because I've got a sort of really tenuous series of threads here running through things. So actually, before I do that, let me talk briefly about a book about the West. Some of you may know the good friend of mine, the author Thomas Goodrich. Tom's responsible for some tremendous books over the years. He's not released one recently over the past few years for all sorts of reasons, but his output's been prodigious and always looking at things from an alternative, hidden history point of view. And I understand that this book that I'm about to mention, Scalp Dance, of which I have a copy and which I've sort of skimmed through, I've not actually sat down and read it from cover to cover, is probably the best book, or in terms of sales, probably the biggest selling book he's done. I guess maybe this is because it appeals obviously to an American audience, but nevertheless, it's a riveting read, Scalp Dance, which you can find on Amazon and all the usual places. And I'm just going to read you the blurb here. Some of the most savage war in world history was waged on the American plains from 1865 to 1879, so immediately after cessation of hostilities, and the death of Lincoln, which of course we were talking about Lincoln last week. As settlers moved west following the Civil War, they found powerful Indian tribes barring the way. When the U.S. Army intervened, a bloody and prolonged conflict ensued. Drawing heavily from diaries, letters, and memoirs from American Plains settlers, historian Thomas Goodrich weaves a spellbinding tale of life and death on the prairie, told in the timeless words of the participants themselves. Scalp Dance is a powerful, unforgettable epic that shatters modern myths. Within its pages, the reader will find a truthful account of Indian warfare as it occurred. And if you're someone who's read Tom's other very well-known book, Hellstorm, which is an awful book, I've said this before on many times, awful in the sense that it details an awful series of events and provides you with an insight into one of those great chapters of untold tales of history finally being told. You'll be familiar that in that book too, it's the actual people who lived through that period, 1944 to 1947, because more German people were killed after the war than during it. This is also an unknown fact. And so this is a similar sort of approach. So that's the Western link for today. I'm not going into the whole of it, but nevertheless, it's the case that with all of these tales, as we look at them, the actual real true tale is not quite what Hollywood has portrayed, not quite what the liberal-minded would have you think. The moving out across the West met with stern resistance from the Indians, and they were not without their savage elements. You'll find out all about that, and some unbelievable tales of endurance by Western Europeans as they moved across America. So if you want to get a good read about something for the autumn nights, Scalp Dance might well be it. Anyway, so now we're going to keep this tenuous little link going. Back to the image. The image is, of course, by Mark Majori, and it is of cowboys. And Majori was born in Fontainebleau, and I thought I would just mention that. So he's of French origin, but he's a French-American painter. And at the age of 15, during his first visit to the US, he went on a month-long road trip from New York to San Francisco and visited several national parks and other sites in the southwestern United States. And he later cited that trip as the beginning of his fascination with the Southwest and the inspiration behind his Western art. And there's a little quote here later on, which I like. Majori began painting Western scenes 2014, so this is only over the last 10 years or so. And since then, his works have been featured in Forbes, Flaunt, Art of the West, Southwest Art, Western Horseman, and others. Majori has been noted in particular for the way he paints clouds in his landscape scenes. And if you look at the image that we've got for today, and you look at that cloud, you might get an idea of why he's been noted for that. With Christopher Barker describing them as layered textural monuments that both dwarf and magnify the subject with impossible detail. And I think that that's true. If you see some of his other paintings, I suspect if you've not seen them before, you may be bedazzled by them. Of course, I'm laying it on thick, but I am a fan, if that's the right word. It's illustration and painting of the highest of the highest standards. And if you want to follow it more, I think there's a documentary of him somewhere on YouTube. In fact, I'm sure there is, about 30, 40 minutes long, of him out in Arizona or somewhere like that with his wife, sketching and painting, and his abilities are off the chart, really. And so it's wonderful to see a craftsman, a master, skilled artist at work in this way. There's something about those clouds. They're like a different world, it seems to me. You're being beckoned into a totally different universe when you look at those clouds. They're better than some of the best clouds I ever saw in my life, it seems to me. So there we go. Now, so there you go. That's the little Western opening bit, which has really got nothing to do with the rest of the themes. Although you never know, maybe a cowboy might call in later on, and we can get back to all that kind of stuff. So, what was the French Connection? Well, it was a film with Gene Hackman back in the 1970s. No, not that French Connection. I think I mentioned last week, and certainly I'm mentioning it to a lot of people I speak to because I'm a bit like a broken record at times, or when I get the bit between my teeth. I picked up a copy of The French Revolution by Nestor Webster about 8 or 10 days ago. I don't know whether I got it before or after last week's show. Anyway, I've managed to plough through the first sort of fifth of the book. It's about 500 or 600 pages long. Plough's the wrong word, actually, because I've breezed through it. It's a wonderful book, and the reason I'm reading it, just to let you know, is, as I've mentioned here before, at the tail end of November this year, Sir Ridley Scott, in his early 80s, has got a new film coming out, or his latest film. It looks as though he's going to be making films forever, which is probably no bad thing. Napoleon. So Napoleon is coming out. The trailer is quite tantalizing, and so I thought, I don't know if I'm going to have enough time actually between now and then to actually read anything too much more about Napoleon, although there are some alternative documents which we'll probably go into as we get a little bit nearer the date. I thought I'd get to grips really with the French Revolution, which is actually the crucible from which he was born, I suppose you could say. It was out of the hell of the French Revolution that Napoleon really came to the fore, and not without the willingness and the ability to deliver devastating violence to the civilians in Paris in the late 1790s. We'll get on to that maybe on another show, but that's what kind of brought him to prominence. And the parallels, I think I mentioned before, between him and the life of Adolf Hitler and Germany, very similar parallels, not exactly the same, but similar, which is kind of ironic as well in a way when you look at the historical antagonism between France and Germany down through the centuries. And I remember even back in the 60s and 70s when I was a young lad running around, not that I sat around watching TV too much, but there was always much talk of the sort of conflicts with the marvellous and wonderful European Union, which we've all come to love and adore, of the conflicts really between France and Germany, which of course at the time were the two most powerful nations in it because we had yet to join, which of course we were all very, very keen not to do, but it went ahead anyway. Or at least we were keen to join it from a commercial exchange point of view, but not from a political union point of view. And they said there would never be a political union, didn't they? And they lied, because that's all they were interested anyway, although union is stretching it a little bit, I think. Now that we've done Brexit, apparently, so they tell us, so our vote indicated that we've left the whole thing. Anyway, so the French Revolution and Nestor Webster's book, if you've heard of it and haven't read it, I would recommend it very much. It's a blast to read. And I've learned so many things in the first 100 pages that I was totally unaware of. I mean, that's not too much of a surprise, because the truth is, I didn't know a great deal about it anyway. I just know that there's a chain of revolutions up and down the line, beginning with the English so-called Civil War under Cromwell and against Charles I, and that entire sort of political upheaval in this nation 400 years ago, 420, 30 years ago, that kind of time. That was the first one. And then we get the French Revolution 140 years later, something like that. There's probably other incidents that I've missed out, but in terms of major marking points, this is key. Both involve regicide, that is the killing of the king. Charles I, of course, lost his head, as did King Louis XVI. And in both cases, the story that we've received is probably not quite what it was. Anyway, in reading Webster's book so far, So the story so far, one of the things that's really clear, and this I think is very apt and appropriate for our situation right now, with the kind of psychological muddlement that's taken place in the crowds of our nations because of this COVID warfare that's been conducted against us. Not even just the supposed jab and all that other stuff that goes with it, but the actual manipulation of information and scaremongering, the gaslighting through the news, is very apt, because in the French Revolution you see it in a very raw and very unpleasant state. And I want to read you a couple of pages from it, which is probably going to take the rest of my life. No, about 10 or 15 minutes maybe, something like that, along with a few asides as we go. Before I do that, though, I want to read you something about the madness of crowds, which I'm supposed to have up here. Here it is. Okay, so I don't know. This book has been, I've had it on my bookshelves for years and dabbled in and out of it. Yet again, an old book. And why am I mentioning these old things? Well, they're not really old, actually. Anything that's happened over the last 400 or 500 years is just yesterday in terms of what's going on. And human nature does not change. We still get spooked and wound up and controlled by the same sorts of forces that were spooking and winding people up and controlling them 200 years ago, 400 years ago. Of course, back then, the results were horrifically violent in sort of face-to-face combat and slaughter, which is pretty bad, very bad. And we don't know quite where this is going to go. I'm not here to sort of gaslight you again, but I wanted to just read you the preface from this book. This is called, let me just read the whole title out. It's by Charles Mackay, and it's called Memoirs of Extraordinary Popular Delusions and the Madness of Crowds. And it's really, it covers an awful lot of things that you've probably heard of. John Law, the Scotsman who ran a big sort of pyramid scheme down in France and wrecked the entire national economy. Tulips and daffodil rushes, all this kind of stuff. The Mississippi thing. There's a lot of things in there. And we might dabble in and out of it in the weeks and months to come, just to illustrate that if you think things are bad now, there's been periods in recent history, i.e. over the last 200 to 300 years, when they've been very bad as well. It's like a sort of mad mind disease. I'm just going to read the opening paragraph, but it's quite long. This is from Mackay's The Madness of Crowds. Let me just read you this. And it's actually, I'm reading it really for the last sentence, because it's the last sentence that's the key sentence. He writes, "In reading the history of nations, we find that, like individuals, they have their whims and their peculiarities, their seasons of excitement and recklessness, when they care not what they do. We find that whole communities suddenly fix their minds upon one object and go mad in its pursuit, that millions of people become simultaneously impressed with one delusion and run after it, till their attention is caught by some new folly more captivating than the first. We see one nation suddenly seized from its highest to its lowest members with a fierce desire of military glory, another as suddenly becoming crazed upon a religious scruple, and neither of them recovering its senses until it has shed rivers of blood and sowed a harvest of groans and tears to be reaped by its posterity. At an early age in the annals of Europe, its population lost their wits about the sepulchre of Jesus and crowded in frenzied multitudes to the Holy Land. Another age went mad for fear of the devil and offered up hundreds of thousands of victims to the delusion of witchcraft. At another time, the many became crazed on the subject of the philosopher's stone and committed follies till then unheard of in the pursuit. It was once thought a venial offence, in very many countries of Europe, to destroy an enemy by slow poison. Persons who would have revolted at the idea of stabbing a man to the heart drugged his pottage without scruple, and there's nothing worse than pottage without scruple, is there? Ladies of gentle birth and manners caught the contagion of murder, until poisoning under their auspices became quite fashionable. I'm sure there's certain characters within Agatha Christie novels and that kind of thing, those little poisoning type people, you know. Some delusions, he writes, though notorious to all the world, have subsisted for ages, flourishing as widely among civilized and polished nations as among the early barbarians with whom they originated. That of dueling for instance, and the belief in omens and divination of the future, which seem to defy the progress of knowledge to eradicate them entirely from the popular mind. Money, and we know a thing or two now about that, and we're going to know a bit more as the weeks go by. Money, again, has often been a cause of the delusion of multitudes. You don't say. Sober nations have all at once become desperate gamblers and risked almost their existence upon the turn of a piece of paper. This is true in very spectacular fashion. To trace the history of the most prominent of these delusions is the object of the present pages. And here this last sentence, the key one. Men, it has been well said, think in herds. It will be seen that they go mad in herds, while they only recover their senses slowly and one by one. I put it to you, listeners of the audience, not that I've ever done that sort of thing, that this is the kind of age that we are living in, that there's an aspect of this that is definitely taking place, that we have been divided with people still, unfortunately, huge numbers. Part of that herd, it's a very, very strong impulse because we're bound into it simply because of historical precedent. You're outside of the group, you're going to die. A wolf's going to eat you, something like that. It's very, very strong impulse, very difficult to resist. I'm going to read the sentence again. Men, it has been well said, think in herds. It will be seen that they go mad in herds, while they only recover their senses slowly and one by one. So, to all of us here and elsewhere who are slowly recovering our senses one by one, I salute you, because this is an urgent task that we have to do and keep up every single day, particularly under present conditions. It's quite a thing. So there you go, the madness of crowds. And now, I'm just doing a lot of reading today. I wasn't necessarily planning to, but now that I look at it, that's obviously a fib, because I'm I'm doing just that. I want to just read a couple of pages about this situation in France with the French Revolution. And the point is that nearly everything in history, until we examine the other side, is basically a bit of a joke. Napoleon actually said that history is a set of lies agreed upon. And that's a pretty good call. It's a very good call, actually. So you have to go outside of the agreement of the establishment to begin to really poke around in it and get to some kind of grips with the whole thing. Okay, so this is after the storming of the Bastille, which wasn't really stormed, actually. It was very messy. But the whole episode of the Bastille is, again, once you get to the bottom of it, not the glorious thing that you think you saw in those films a long time ago. Liberty, fraternity, equality, all nonsense. All slogans done to rile up and successfully rile up and wind up the crowd who are going basically out of their minds this way and that. I'm not going to cover all of that because you'd have to really read the book to see this sort of ebb and flow of the control of the psychological and spiritual state of the French people. It's also worth mentioning now, right at this little point, that their king, they loved. They didn't not love him. They weren't even that unhappy. There were certain taxes and restrictions upon them which they really did want to get rid of, and Louis XVI was in the process of getting rid of them. But this ran counter to the intentions of the plotters, the saboteurs, the instigators of it. They didn't want the king to do good things for their people, because if they did, the people would lose any causative reason to rise up against him, which is all they were interested in. And to some degree, these same tactics of manipulation are being employed with the WEF nonsense and the takeover of all of our governments and the fact that they're working for that and not working for their people. There are parallels. It's not exactly the same, but you'll get the theme as it goes. Also, we're going to go into a word right now. Let me just read this bit out. It says, then, I'm just going to jump in. You'll pick it up as we go, really. I think it's pretty self-explanatory. It says, then, when the fury of the populace was once more thoroughly aroused, deputations of fishwives were sent by the leaders of the conspiracy to demand that the king should come to Paris. Fishwives, eh? I read this a little bit earlier today and I thought, ooh, I don't really know what a fishwife is. I kind of had an idea, so I thought I'd go and look it up. Wikipedia is quite good on this. This is good. So I went to look up fishwife. Let me give you this one. This is fun. A fishwife, fish-fag, yeah, I'm reading it as it comes, or fish lass, a fish lass, is a woman who sells fish. Well, I'll be. There you go. So if you're a woman and you've ever sold fish, you're a fishwife. There's a little bit more to it than that. She is typically the wife of a fisherman, selling her husband's catch. But other sources of fish have been used. She might sell somebody else's fish. It's getting complicated already. Here's the kicker. Some wives and daughters of fishermen were notoriously loud and foul-mouthed, as noted in the expression, to swear like a fishwife, as they sold fish in the marketplace. Among the reasons for their outspokenness, I mean, they wouldn't get on in today's society, would they? They'd be all banned. Among the reasons for their outspokenness were that their wares were highly perishable, fish rotting pretty quickly, and lost value if not sold quickly, and the similarity of their product to that of others selling the same thing with volume of voice or colourful language drawing customer attention. Makes sense, right? Also, managing alone while their menfolk were away fishing for extended periods made them strong and self-sufficient. In this context, the word wife means woman rather than married woman, from the Old English wif, W-I-F, woman. So there you go. So, ladies, if you want to get a good pair of tonsils on you and learn some new abusive terms, and, well, they're probably not new now, I suppose they're all around. But if you really want to get out there and really mark yourself out in the fish marketplace, which doesn't exist anymore, does it? I suppose it does at Billingsgate. Is that where they do the fish? I remember my mum going along to them, and lots of shouting in the marketplace. Quite overwhelming when you're about 5 or 6. All that what are they all shouting about? Well, this man wants to sell his carrots more than this man wants to sell carrots, and this, that, and the other. But very lively space. So there you go. See, I'm full of little diversions tonight. The story keeps meandering and going here, there, and everywhere. But that's what a fishwife is. So if you are a fishwife, don't call in. I can't be doing with any abuse tonight. This is terrible. We don't want any of that. Now, where were we? Ah, yes. See, don't worry. There's no more stops for words. I don't think there are anyway. We have to get into the mood of this little particular scene. It says, let me start again, and we'll just go through fishwives. We'll breeze past it now. Then, when the fury of the populace was once more thoroughly aroused, deputations of fishwives were sent by the leaders of the conspiracy. There was one. There was a conspiracy. Yes, there was. The Duc d'Orléans was at the head of it, a revolting character, to demand that the king should come to Paris. Emphasized by Webster, it was the first of the series of attempts made by the revolutionaries to have the king assassinated by the people, just like Charles I was done in. And if you're not familiar with the situation with Charles I, there was a lot of toing and froing between Cromwell and his backers in Holland about getting the king assassinated. Had to be done in a certain way. They weren't going to just kill him because of the repercussions. It goes on here, they dared not do the deed themselves, these conspirators, for they knew the frightful punishment attaching to regicide. They knew, moreover, the furious indignation so foul a crime would arouse in the minds of the people in general, to whom the king was still almost a sacred being. They loved him. You'll see from Webster's book, they loved this guy. And he loved them too. It's quite touching in a way. But if the populace could be sufficiently inflamed, and at the psychological moment the king were brought amongst them, might not some brigand lurking in the crowd, some obscure fanatic, give way to a sudden impulse and pull the trigger of his rusty flintlock? The thing was not impossible. The Queen, that's Marie Antoinette, you'll know of her, and that phrase that's attributed to lead up the meat cake, that's not straight either, although I'm not covering that today, although I do like cake. The Queen, who foresaw the same possibilities, threw herself in vain at the king's feet and implored him not to expose himself to the threatening populace. But the king, convinced that if each citizen owes to his sovereign the sacrifice of his life, the sovereign equally owes to his country the sacrifice of his, turned a deaf ear to all the forebodings, trusted to his people and the good genius of France, and in spite of the Queen's entreaties, showed himself firm and unshakable. I have promised, he said. My intentions are pure. I trust in this. The people must know that I love them, and anyhow, they can do as they like with me. Okay? Louis XVI, says de Lescure, was neither a superior intellect nor an energetic will. He was an incorruptible conscience. I think we could do with someone like that these days, although we don't want the same thing happening to them as Louis XVI. And these words give the clue to all his oscillations, for conscience is necessarily a more uncertain guide than policy or self-interest. As long as he felt convinced a certain course was right, he followed it without a thought for his personal safety or advantage. At 10 o'clock in the morning on July the 17th, the king, escorted by the deputies of the Assembly and the milice, I pronounced that wrong, the milice bourgeoise, set forth for Paris. I'm learning new French words, you see, and pronouncing them incorrectly. Isn't that fun? His guards were taken from him, and in their place marched 200,000 men. That's quite a thing, isn't it? 200,000 men armed with scythes and pickaxes, with guns and lances, dragging cannons behind them, and women dancing like bacchantes, waving branches of leaves tied with ribbons. In order not to tire the people, the king had ordered the procession to move at foot's pace, and it was 4 o'clock by the time they reached Paris. In the midst of this threatening escort, Louis XVI sat pale and anxious, and on entering the city he leant forward, casting his eyes wonderingly over the assembled multitude that received him in an ominous silence. For the people had been forbidden to cheer him. Get the picture? A lot of people, deathly silence. That's a bit intimidating. I sound as though I'm an apologist for the French royalty. In a way, I kind of am once you get the background. You see how tragically France was destroyed by subterfuge. This is what this is all about, which we are going to be if we don't get to grips with it. So potent was the spell exercised over the popular mind, Mackay, by the leaders of the revolution that not a soul dared to utter the cry of Vive le Roi, up with the king basically, and brigands posted in the crowd silenced the least murmur of applause. Thus, dragged like a captive through the streets of the city, the king was obliged to endure this terrible humiliation for which no cause whatever existed. None. Absolutely none. He had done absolutely nothing to forfeit the popularity which only 2 days earlier he had enjoyed. 2 days prior to this, he was fated. Now this. The good Archbishop of Paris fared worse at the hands of the populace. For alone of all the procession, he was hissed by those he had ruined himself to feed. So the idea that you've got, and that we've all got, is that, you know, the peasants were being treated awfully and they weren't getting any food. And this is, again, manure. In fact, it's so backwards, this twisting of truth, which we are sitting in the middle of, this sort of electronic mire of truth twisting 24/7. You've got to really keep your wits about you. That people that were actually distributing the food, because there was anticipation of there being a food shortage in Paris, and there wasn't, it just needed organising, and the people that went out of their way to do that, they were then charged with hoarding it. It didn't matter. And the minds of the mob were set on fire with this and were just swept from one side of the argument to another almost instantly. It goes on. Sitting in his carriage, his eyes downcast, striving to overcome the agitation of his mind, his thoughts must have indeed been bitter. I would imagine so. As the procession passed through the Place Louis XV, the possibility that both the Queen and the revolutionary leaders had foreseen was realised. A hand in the crowd pulled the trigger of a gun, and the shot, missing the king, killed a poor woman at the back of the royal carriage. The incident was hushed up, and even the king was unaware it had occurred. Thus, saved by the mysterious power which protected him every time that he was brought face to face with the people, the king reached the Hôtel de Ville. Under an archway of pikes and naked swords, he passed to the throne prepared for him. Bailey presented him with the tricolour cockade. This is the symbol now of this revolutionary movement, which is only a few days old at this stage. It's been plotted for ages, but it's actually kicked off a few days prior at the Bastille. And the king, accepting it as that which it professed to be, the cockade of Paris, placed it in his hat. Then suddenly it seemed that the spell was broken, and cries of Vive le Roi broke out on all sides. Once more, Lely passionately appealed to the people's loyalty and made a great speech about that, which I won't go into right now. I'll just end it off. Again and again, Lely was interrupted by tumultuous applause, and the king, overwhelmed by this sudden revulsion of popular feeling, could only murmur brokenly in reply, "My people can always count on my love." His departure for Versailles was as triumphant as his arrival had been humiliating. an hour earlier. Huh? When he entered his carriage, with a trickle of cockade in his hat, an immense crowd gathered round him, crying, "Long live our good king, our friend, our father." It was 11 o'clock before he reached the chateau. On the marble staircase, the Queen, Marie Antoinette, with the Dauphin in her arms, was waiting for him in an agony of suspense, and at the sight of the husband she had not dared to hope ever to see again, she fell weeping on his neck. But when she raised her eyes and saw the sinister badge, this cockade, the enemy's colours in his hat, her heart sank. From that moment she felt that all was lost. But the king was happy, not because his life had been spared, but because he believed that he had regained the love of his people. Here endeth the reading bit. So I've read this stuff out because I think it's highly relevant to the condition that we're in. Okay, I'm not the King of France, and neither are you. In fact, they don't have kings, unfortunately, anymore. And this entire rollout across Europe from Charles I, it starts in England even before that, right through to the modern day, is part of this chain, this domino chain of events, which have brought us to this point. The line runs all the way through it, and is worth everybody's attention. You don't have to spend thousands of hours studying it. Well, you can if you want, and bring these things up. But when we talk about these things, or when I'm talking about them now, we kind of breathe life back into them. These are events that happened not now, i.e. in the past, but so's yesterday. Yesterday was in the past. And that sort of, that yearning that we have had for a time machine, I'm going to suggest to you that we've all got one. It's called the mind armed with imagination. And we can go back up and down this timeline to see and feel and be in the moment through writings like this. Nesta Webster writes brilliantly about these things. It's very accessible, very easy to understand, and unfolds the entire evil that was running around at this time. The storming of the Bastille, for example, is the governor was seeking to not hurt anyone. The troops stood down. They never fired a cannon, and they got killed for it. They were trying to help the people, but the misunderstanding in the communications became all-encompassing, and they got driven mad. And the governor, later that day, his head was on a pike, and he tried to save them. This is what you call a tragedy, I think. Isn't that what you call tragic? This misunderstanding of things taking place all the time. I don't know whose heads are supposed to go on pikes this time round. I'm kind of against the whole idea of it. But when communication breaks down or is manipulated as it was here, and as I said, I'm only a fifth of the way through. This is on page 104 of about 500 or 600 pages of the thing. But you see this manipulation of the great crowded mind, and the bravery of certain people under these circumstances is heartbreaking. It really is. That people who are seeking to help those are misconstrued as being the enemy and are done away with. How bad is that? Are we in a similar sort of situation? Maybe not, because I'm hard-pressed. I'm hard-pressed to find too many people out there that I think in the public space are actually going to bat for us. In fact, it's very, in terms of political discourse at the moment, not that I'm a big fan. I don't really follow it that much, simply because I think the whole system's broken, which, it's not, you don't need a degree in rocket science to say that, do you? You can see that the whole thing's broken. But where is the voice for people like us? If you think you're a people like us. I mean, I think I'm a people like us. Where is that voice? At least back in the 60s and 70s, I always had this idea, it probably turns out to be manure as well, but that there was genuine rebuttals of things, strongly worded and effectively worded from politicians of different sides of the house with regards to certain matters. Does it look or feel like that now? It doesn't. there's no interaction really with the public communication space. Is there public discourse? Or is it just presentations and pack-controlled spaces where nothing can be said? I think it's definitely like that in the back end of the whole thing. Definitely like that. So I wanted to, obviously, just I'm just going to hop on over to somewhere as well here whilst I'm just looking at things. There's obviously, I think, a lot to be learned from this. Otherwise, I wouldn't even be bothering, sort of doing it. I am a bit of a fan anyway, and I'm just hopping over to Rumble to sort of have a look at the chat. So let's just do a bit of house cleaning here. For me, actually, that phrase means an awful lot more than just me looking. I actually literally do have to do a lot of house cleaning, really. So, fantastic. That's great. Okay. Paul, were there any common threads shared by the English Civil War, the French head-chopping revolution, and the American Civil War? Yes, there were. The same force was behind all of them. What was that force? Let's call it the money power. I'm going to call it that. I'm going to call it the money power. Because in all of these cases, the organization, transfer of wealth, the setting up of control of economies was key in this. It was the overthrow, obviously in Europe, it was the overthrow of monarchy, or the beginning of it. Interestingly, with England, they couldn't fully extinguish it. I think there were certain holes in the plan. Now, there's a document called The Nameless War by Captain Archibald Maule Ramsay. It's only about 105 pages, 110 pages long. I won't be reading things out from that necessarily because it might land me in trouble if you get my drift. And you might think, oh, Paul, you're scaredy cat. Well, we'll see about that. But what I might well do is record it at some point as an audio booklet and make it available if you wanted to hear that. You can always read it, of course, and it's not a very long read, but it's as a document in terms of bringing us from the past to this point. It's marvelous because of its concision. And you will see that this thread of this control to overthrow the kings and queens of England and of France and of elsewhere has the same hand in all of it. And the money power seduces and has seduced the best of each of these nations to side with it. And they become incredibly well-paid traitors. What else would you call them? People that run counter to the laws of the land to get certain things done. I mean, Charles I was not a particularly driven or competent king, from what I can see. But to take his head off is a bit savage. But that was the way that's the way you settled an argument back then. Obviously, his was chopped off with an axe, with a man at the end of it swinging the axe. But the French Revolution, it gets out of order. It's like industrial scale. The guillotine. I forgot the nickname for the thing. But 25, 26, 27,000 of the French nobility and their children were beheaded in spectacles. Is that not the madness of crowds? It's remarkable. And I think we need to know and be aware that can take place with people. Now, it's possible that since 1946, I picked that because the application of the electric age, of the communication age, has gone through the roof since then. Obviously, there was radio prior to that and movies, but then we had the mass onslaught of TV, so you've got full-blown, full spectrum attention deficit disorder taking place. Everybody... someone said, no way, was it that many? 20, 25, 26,000? Yeah, it was. From the figures I had. It wasn't 10. They went mad. They went berserk. The bit I've just read, by the way, with Louis XVI is about 1789, 1790. I might have got the date slightly wrong because I haven't read a date for about 40 pages. So I'd have to go back and check. But there's the 6 Years of Terror. This is before Robespierre's even arrived on the scene, right? And we've all heard of him. Interestingly, of course, Robespierre met the same fate that he delivered to so many others. His head was taken off. And if you've seen or heard the interview with Yuri Bezmenov by Ed Griffin, Bezmenov was a defector from Russia, and went to America and spilled the beans on the demoralization process of a nation. It takes about 20, 25 years. And he said and talked about what happens to the useful idiots. Robespierre was a useful idiot. Danton likewise. I don't know what happened to Danton. We'll go through some of these names because I'm going to keep this up as a theme for a few weeks. So you can all go watch Napoleon as well and go, I know a bit of the background story to this, depending on how much of it I tell. I mean, realistically, you should go and get the book if you think it's that good. And there's a free PDF copy or a complete scanned copy on archive.org if you get into it. And if you don't, you don't. I mean, I've got a sort of leather-bound volume. Sounds awfully posh, doesn't it? I thought I'd treat myself to one. Went mad. It came from India. There's a company out in India that make these things. I've forgotten their name now. They take the old manuscript and photograph it, and it's not half bad. It's not as if it was a brand new book, but the volume itself is good, the paper's good, and something about nestling down in a chair late at night. The rest of the family have gone to bed. I'm sat there with my pipe. I don't have a pipe. This is all in my imagination. The grandfather clock is ticking in the corner. I don't have a grandfather clock. It's not ticking in the corner. I'm curling up in a chair and ploughing through 30 or 40 pages of that. I get taken to a different world, really. And it's somehow this stuff would not have scared me when I was young, but it kind of really chills me to the marrow now, considering the state of our nation, our nations, as we experience them right now. Someone's given the name of the bookmakers. So there you go. Gyan Books, Gyan Books.com in India. So if you look them up and you're looking for an old book in a nice volume, nice, eh? But in a leather-bound volume, they do a jolly good job, and it's relatively inexpensive. I think it was about 25, 28 quid when it came over to me. They're brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. They said it was going to take 2 months, but it took about a month to get here. I was in no rush. And there are other books by Webster that I would love hardbound copies of. She's brilliant, and was privileged to certain fields of knowledge that others weren't, and puts it in a way, I feel, that's very accessible to the layman, which I consider myself to be. We all are, really, because we're not specialists in this stuff. We're bumbling along in our own good old way, and I think that's a jolly good thing to do, you know. So, I'll read that out again. Look, Gyan Books, Gyan Books.com in India. So, yeah. And just getting back to Bezmenov, he talks about these useful idiots, the people that are assisting the demoralization process of their own country, like the Cloward-Piven plan, which you may have heard of, this way of overloading the government systems to break it down. Why? Why would you want to do that? I mean, obviously, our view of government is the accurate one in that we haven't got one. I mean, it's difficult to assess government when you haven't really got one that's actually working for you, that pretends to be, but is clearly not, because by their fruits shall ye know them. And we do know them. These simple sort of rules of thumb help us deal with this sort of stuff. So not having a government is a bit of a problem if you're supposed to have one in a representative democracy. But we can't be living in one of those then either, can we? Are we living in a representative democracy? I don't think we are. I think I had a clip, actually. Somebody sent me a clip about something on this this that might be useful. Have I got it here loaded up? I do. There's a lot of pauses in this, but it's only a minute. Listen to this. This is okay. Oh, you won't be able to hear that. It's very quiet. Hang on just a minute. What have I done? You know, I do that every week. I have my volume drawers down, as the actress said to the bishop. Here we go. Just listen to this.
Because democracy basically means government by the people, of the people, for the people. But the people are retarded. So let us say, government by the retarded, for the retarded, of the retarded.
Do you feel retarded? I do. Less retarded than I was 30 years ago, but we must be to some degree. But that's that chap. He's dead now. Osho, I think he became one of those Indian guru types. Wasn't it the orange people and all that kind of stuff? I wasn't in any of that stuff, by the way, but I am aware of him. And it's a good little point. I was thinking maybe for the rest of the show, I could take huge pauses between each word, but I won't do that because we'll all go mad. But I guess if you want instant gravitas, that's what you do. You could just try it out. Maybe when you're ordering fish and chips, it might become like a momentous moment as you slowly deliver the order. Anyway, yes, government by the retarded, for the retarded, of the retarded. Is that not the case? And who's to be surprised by that? If you are mal-educated, misinformed, misdirected, and sent all over the shop during supposedly your formative years of education, what's going to happen with you? Well, you're a good sort of cog in the system. And for a long period of time, it's worked out well for a lot of people who've been quite happy to be cogs, hasn't it? Doesn't look as though it's going to go that way now. And going back to Bezmenov, those very people that assisted the process, he said those are the first people basically to get it. They think that they're going to be on the winning side. I feel about that this may go this way if the WF, this globalist thing, gets the upper hand. I don't believe it will, by the way. I think there's an awful lot of twists and turns coming up, and we must be there to navigate them and duck and dive and dodge and weave and do whatever we can. Like, it's guerrilla warfare for us. It's not massed field armies anymore. Maybe it never has been for a long time. It's definitely that. And I'm not going to start shouting that we're going to win, because I don't know. Nobody does. And I don't even know what I mean by saying we're going to win. But I know that the ideas that are coming down from that spigot, from that dung hole, are useless to the vast majority of us, and are only of any use to that small group of hobbyists whose hobby is ruling the world. It's a very dangerous thing for the rest of us, because that's what they want to do. And it's caused all sorts of mayhem, particularly over these last 3 years. So I guess everybody's familiar with the agendas, the Agenda 2020 or 2021, and now we're through to Agenda 2030. And their narrative control, I think, is falling apart. And it's down to us to really keep it falling apart. To assist people to see just how stupid, retarded it is. But they're very good out there at sticking to their guns, or maybe they're just retarded, which is possibly even more of a worry. I mean, what's the scariest thing? People who are consciously evil, or people who are stupid in crowds? It's the latter, possibly for us. It's the condition of those that we live nearby who get swept up in this stuff that you've got to watch out for. I have no idea how you would possibly escape that. If you were trapped in those crowds back in Paris in 1790, what are you going to do? Many people just died pointlessly for no reason whatsoever, to bring about a change that wasn't even wanted, because they perceived that it was, or they were told that certain injustices had been done to them. It was gaslighting on an astronomical persistent scale. And of course, once the plotters have started that, they have to keep stepping it up, which is really what's occurring here, isn't it? That the communication spin is continually intensified all the time, because if we start to roll it back, and I would suggest that listeners like you, people like me, and those that you know, and many others that are not here yet, let me be optimistic about things, right, that are not here yet, are seeing and noting this. They know that if they get to know about this stuff, the other side are in deep trouble. We have to, as the carpet rolls back and their crimes and misdemeanors to get to this point become more well known, and they are considerable. And there are many people, I include myself, who know a great deal about that. I ought to know a bit because I've spent 25 years reading books about it, or 20 years, and I'm not alone. I hang around with people who've read even more than that and know a lot of stuff. But this is not a competition to say, well, I know all this stuff and you know all that stuff. It's not about that. because it comes down to very, very simple things. We're looking for mechanisms to regain some kind of authority over our lives, of which they have assumed all authority and stripped us of it, or are seeking to do that. And of course, our weapon of choice, the one that we cannot help but use because it's basically the only one we've got, is our voices and our thoughts and our writings and our ability to connect with and bind up with our own people, those that are bindable with, the ones that are not the useful idiots that Bezmenov has talked about. And when he talks about the demoralization process, and I imagine if you've talked to people about topics that are off the spectrum, as it were, things for which people have probably no context at all to fit them in, like an alternative view of the first half of the 20th century from the war's point of view, because there is another view, and without it, people don't know what took place. They do know what Hollywood's told them. They do know what the news and the mainstream press and the university presses have told them. They don't know that those conduits are controlled by the very forces that are at the helm of things right now. Then if you introduce these topics too fast to someone, this is my personal experience, if you do it, they metaphorically leave the room. They may still be stood in front of you, but they actually go AWOL. And at first, I used to get quite cross about this because I used to think, well, can't you, why would I come up to you and tell you lies? But it's got nothing to do with that. It really doesn't have anything to do with that. It's to do with the fact that you're like trying to fit a square peg in a round hole, and people are sometimes not really ready for that. It's very, very difficult in all those sorts of ways. So Bezmenov, I've got the 13-minute thing. It's Ed Griffin who interviewed him. And Ed Griffin, I think I mentioned the other week, he's still banging on. Good old Ed. God bless him. He's in his early 90s, as articulate and as clear as ever. And I don't think I've even mentioned The Secret. Is it The Secret of Jekyll Island? I've got a copy on my thing about the Federal Reserve. See, I've gone nearly an hour. I tried to go an hour without talking about money. It was just a little challenge to myself this week. So I thought, what could we pick on? And, that's not about money. But of course, it is about money. It's about money because these agents provocateurs, these instigators, were paid. They were paid by the Duc d'Orléans, who had a lot of wealth, but they were also paid and supported from certain clubs in London that were part and parcel of this process. It's almost as if it took them 100 years or so to settle the arrangements in England until they'd really reconcentrated their base. And the French Revolution is the first striking out to actually affect another country with the same sort of malarkey, and it's the same modus operandi. And we're seeing it here with the so-called migrant invasion, like agents provocateurs being brought in, ruffians, yeah? It's the same thing. So it's useful for us to know the book. Okay, it's the top of the hour. It's kind of the end of the first hour. I'm going to play a little song. How about that? Actually, it's a great song. And yet again, I don't know whether after the show, I post these things to YouTube. I never know whether these songs are going to get through. And so far, touch wood, every single one has. I might be pushing it a bit with this one, although I did see a YouTube account which had got it on and it wasn't from the artist. This is Van Morrison, They Own the Media. Rather apt, I think.
They tell us that ignorance is bliss. I guess for those that control the media it is. They own the media, they control the stories we are told. If you ever try to go against them, you will be ignored, 'cause they control the narrative, they perpetuate the myth. Keep on telling you lies, tell you ignorance is bliss. Believe it all and you'll never get wise to the truth, 'cause they control everything you do, everything you do, everything you do, everything you do. perpetuate the myth. Keep on selling you lies. Tell you ignorance is bliss. Believe it all and you never get the truth. Never get wise. Wise to their lies. To their lies. They control the media. They control the media. They control the media. They control the media.
Hi, welcome to hour 2 of Paul English Live. That was Van Morrison there just rolling through with They Control the Media. And I said earlier on in the show during the first hour that I'd have something quite interesting to say at this point, which I do. So I'd like to welcome on board to the show all the listeners over from the World Broadcasting Network. That's WBN234.com. And welcome to the show. I had a series of little talks with the people at WBN earlier in the week, and they've been fantastically helpful and very encouraging. And they said, we're going to throw you on here for the next hour. So I'm very pleased to be talking to you all, even though you don't know me from Adam, but my name's Paul English. This is coming to you out of the deepest, darkest, merry old England. And so we've just bolted on a whole new additional audience to the show, which is extremely thrilling for me, to be quite honest. So after just 4 or 5 weeks of bumbling around and slowly get my technical doodads in a row, that's what we're doing. So we're also going out as well on Freefall Radio out of South Africa. So a really great little development here for the show, which is I'm just looking at certain messages actually popping up. Maybe I'm going to forget to say something. Fantastic, yeah. So on WBN 324 Talk Radio, I just got a little note about that. I'm just repeating what I'm seeing on the screen. So welcome everybody. It's fantastic to be here. I hope you've been enjoying whatever you were just listening to. I don't know, some Alex Jones bloke or something. I heard about him once. And here we are for the next hour. And if you like what you hear or want to catch up with the whole thing, the show is available on Rumble. So the basic channels for this are Rumble and WBN 324. So it's great. Thanks to everybody there that set this up. And this is going to become a regular feature, and it might even change a little bit more next week into something even a bit more bigger than this. We're hoping that the aim is that the show next week will start 1 hour later than it currently does. And this is to fit it into the WBN schedule more fully and effectively. So, as I said, today there's just 1 hour. But next week we're planning to go for the whole 2 hours. So what that will mean is that we will start 8 p.m. UK time next week, 8 p.m. till 10, which is 3 p.m. Eastern, 2 p.m. Central, 1 p.m. Mountain, and midday Pacific. Look at me with all my time zones. Isn't that fantastic? It's wonderful and marvelous. So there we go. Anyway, so we're here for an hour today on WBN, but hopefully the full 2 hours beginning next week. So big change in things. And I've just waited off really sort of organizing phone numbers and things until this is sort of settled in. I've got to just check a few other things in case people do want to call in and harangue me or talk about things and this, that, and the other. And although only a few weeks in, and all of these have been solo, they've been me all Billy No Mates really all the time, which is intentional because I wanted to get on top of certain workflows that I needed to do. Isn't this thrilling stuff? But most of those seem to be handled now, so we'll be looking to expand out and even bring another voice in, because I can't just read the French Revolution for hours and hours on end in every show. And by the way, if you've just joined the show, that's really what we're covering the last hour. The theme for this show during the first 4 or 5 weeks that we've been running, because it's something that's pretty dear to my, not heart really, it's not something I love, but is the money power. We've really been looking at the money power. I look at it anyway as the central thread with regards to the problems that we face as a people, as peoples in the remnant currently, or the under pressure Western Christian civilizations and nations, the whole of Western and Northern Europe, North America, Canada, the United States, Australia, New Zealand, these places, South Africa. I'm speaking in English. I am Paul English. This is for an English literate sort of audience. Literate's a bit fancy, but you get the idea. It's directed at people that are my people, I suppose. Not that I own you or anything like that, although I am working on that. But that's what this is about. So we've looked at the money power for the last few weeks, and this will be a continual thread that I always come back to, because I see it as the common enemy for all of us. We have all sorts of mad situations taking place at the moment. There's I was reading the other day, there's moves afoot to collapse the bond market. Do you need to know the details of that? I don't think so, but they're setting it up to do that. This means a sort of avalanche of domino effects of government debt all over the place. And I don't think I mentioned bonds too much in the first couple of shows I did about a month back, when I was talking about my intro into this space, which happened a long time ago. So it was back in the 90s when I, obviously not to the degree of knowledge and detail that we have today, but certainly in terms of getting to grips with what I still consider, as I've just said, the main problem, which is the central bank. And the main problem with it is that you and I don't own it. And so we don't own the bank. And if we don't own the bank, somebody else is owning it over us. So we've had all these other developments that take place. And now what have we got? We've got the CBDC thing rolling through. Apparently this is all going to be smashing and wonderful, marvelous, but it's a nonsense, because these are private companies dictating public affairs, and they've been doing it for hundreds of years. And they've been able to do it, of course, in the past slowly and methodically and thoroughly through corruption, bribery, threats, poisoning, the lot. In fact, we were talking about poisoning, weren't we? I was talking about poisoning in the first hour with the book of Charles Mackay. That poisoning people used to be frowned upon. It's not a chivalric way to kill people. You don't go around poisoning them. But I think we could say the last 3 years, how would you describe the COVID debacle? Poisoning? This is as good a word as any. We can come up with all these fancy new terms, but there's two types of poisoning. There's been a physical poisoning for those poor people who have taken multiple jabs and multiple boosters, and we are aware of all the health challenges that they have faced, and possibly, probably, and rather terrifyingly continue to face in the months and years to come, which is awful. There's that one. But the other one, of course, is the psychological terror that's being waged upon us, for you to not know, for you to not be part of the in-group, for you to be a vaccine resistor or whatever it may be, whatever you think you are being called. And so we've been divided. It's been very effective, unfortunately, because we're all at different levels of understanding about things, and this has caused all these sort of problems, to come through and to create this disconnect between us as a people. If you want to call in, you can if you want to. You don't have to. It's okay. I think I took a call the other week, which is okay. These things are slow to build, aren't they? But if you want to call in, it's just via web at the moment, just via web. If you go to paulenglishlive.com/call, paulenglishlive.com/Paul, you'll come through to a little studio there. I might even be able to talk to you if you've got any questions or anything. I've got a few more clips to play and a few more things to cover here over the next 50 minutes of this second hour. So there you go. That was quite a bit for me to take. I did remember making the announcement. I'm rather pleased about that, actually. So it's a big deal for me. And so, yeah, this show's expanded considerably because of this connection with WBN and with Free Fall Radio in South Africa. So it's good to be part of that event, that project. And they're doing great work there. So, yes. Now, what was I going to... There was something else I wanted to cover. A couple of clips with regards. I mentioned Charles Schwab. He was the insurance guy, wasn't he, or something? Or was it an investment company? With Klaus Schwab, the man with the enormous philtrum and the ridiculously theatrical, over-the-top Austrian accent that sounds like he's been sick in a bucket. Silly man. There was where's this little speech I've got? I think I've got a speech here. Yeah. Which one should we do first? Schwab or the... Yeah, we'll do this first. Now, this is about 5 minutes long. It's a Canadian gentleman recently talking, providing a summary of this situation in Canada. It's excellent. About 5 minutes. Here we go.
Good evening. Restructuring of Canadian mayors and municipalities under the auspices of the United Nations began in 1992. PM Mulrooney signed Canada onto UN Agenda 21. Canada thus became a UN member nation state. 178 countries signed on, lured by the promise of big money to go green. By 2000, countries, including Canada, were being governed by directions of the UN, G7, G20, World Economic Forum, and World Health Organization, to name some. Every organization named is a foreign-based NGO, non-governmental organization, and every member of all these organizations is unelected. Parliamentary procedures for law changes weren't followed. In 1994, a municipal primer was issued to all local towns outlining how they were to restructure their governments. Though the municipal primer was a non-binding agreement, all towns adopted it. Our public officials, the mayor and councillors of that day, were partnered with a private corporation, the Corporation of the Town of Aurora, who appointed a chief administrative officer who helped implement the global agenda instead of a local one. The International Council on Local and Environmental Issues, ICLEI, became the main source of consultation to push and fund the global agenda. We remind you that the World Economic Forum and the United Nations signed a strategic partnership framework in 2019 to jointly accelerate the implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. This is the same World Economic Forum whose chairman, Klaus Schwab, famously declared, "You will own nothing and be happy." This is the same Klaus Schwab who, referring to Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, boasted, "We have penetrated more than half of his cabinet." We would ask Mayor Maracas and the councillors, why should the citizens of Aurora bow down to the intrusive dictates of an unelected foreign entity? The fact is we should not, and we will not. What, you ask, does any of this have to do with 15-minute smart cities? Absolutely everything. SMART, S for surveillance, M for monitoring, A for analysis, R for reporting, and T for technology. Technology News editor Patrick Wood, 50 years of experience and expertise on technocracy, wrote, "The 15-minute city is a cover for data collection bonanza for technocrats who design and operate them. Cities designed for maximum efficiency always reveal technocrat thinking that efficiency itself is the goal. Maximum surveillance allows for maximum control to achieve even more efficiency." At its very root, this mechanistic thinking is anti-human. The 15-minute city narrative seeks to fool you in the guise of saving the planet, keeping you safe, and delivering convenience. It's actually the gateway to digital IDs and CBDC, central bank digital currencies. CBDCs allow bankers and or governments to freeze your bank account because you happen to peacefully and lawfully protest and express your disagreement with government policy. Anyone remember the truckers' convoy in Ottawa, February 22, when the Government of Canada invoked the Emergencies Act and froze the private bank accounts of law-abiding citizens? 15-minute cities are wolves in sheep's clothing. Don't believe the countless stories spewing forth from the 24/7 basis from the elitist captured mainstream media, all claiming to have your best interests at heart. We have been burned too many times. In reality, 24/7 surveillance through the Internet of Things inside your home, 5G and LED streetlights outside, monitoring and tracking and recording everything. Implementation of exclusion zones and geofencing to restrict movement and travel. Ability to control behaviors through military-directed energy technologies. Property and car ownership to be outlawed. Evictions from farms and rural areas to gather people into cities. Digital passports being promulgated by the UN, World Economic Forum, and the World Health Organization are in the final stages of planning and implementation. They are tied to social credit score, which is determined by compliance to government directives. These passports control all access and all aspects of life. Digital currency is being implemented to end cash and monitor all your spending. Your digital currency will be turned off or on depending on your compliance score. UBI Universal Basic Income is a state-controlled allowance forcing compliance by restricting access to food, money, services, and education. All of the above will enable climate lockdowns to be implemented easily, arbitrarily, and indefinitely. The real agenda of 15-minute smart cities is to monitor and control everyone and everything. In summary, in the coming days, Council will receive an electronic info packet which will contain the text of this delegation and other items. We, the citizens of Aurora, wish to enter into a meaningful, respectful dialogue with our elected members of Council on this complex, important issue. A key framework of that dialogue is a list of questions posed to Council. Can Council explicitly guarantee that citizens will be remain free to travel as is their right under the Charter of Rights and Freedoms? Can council guarantee not to restrict access to essential services, medical care, bank accounts, government pensions, utilities? Most importantly, we, the citizens of Aurora, need to have the conversation with council about exiting their non-binding agreement with the private for-profit entity known as the Corporation of the Town of Aurora. We need to turn back the page to a simpler time when open, transparent municipal government serving its citizens and working in their best interests ruled the day. We are your equal partners on this journey.
We are your equal partners on this journey, are we? Brilliant speech. Summing everything up in about 5.5 minutes. So now you know what SMART Cities stands for, what the acronym: surveillance, monitoring, analysis, reporting, technology. Maybe you already knew that, but now you really know what it is. They talk about these benefits all the time, but they're benefits just to them. They're not benefits to anybody else. And this is that kind of twilight or double speak that they're involved with. When they say, we are going to improve, they're not addressing you. You're not included in the we. It's got nothing to do with you. They mean they and their cohorts, organizing all this stuff throughout all of these nations. And I suspect that nobody in any of our nations has got any voice anymore. Certainly we don't hear it in England. The idea that your local MP would speak up for you or the interests of people in his constituency is a joke. It doesn't take place. There is no vigorous public discourse. I think I mentioned the other week that they took a vote with regards to some kind of environmental bill over here. This is this thing that's going to creep in where they're going to say, hey, your house is not energy efficient and therefore we're going to take it off you. Seriously, this is what they're looking at. Because this is part of the you will own nothing and you will be happy. I mean, what was that all about? Why did they deliver it like that? Is it to see whether we would actually go for it as we're being stress tested? I don't know. But it's definitely the approach that they took. Anyway, I see that someone's actually arrived to give me a bit of verbal abuse or something like that. It's Paul. Here we go. Paul. Oh, hang on just a minute. I've got to try and unmute him if I can, because I've got him as... There we go.
There we go.
Hi, Paul. Welcome to the show. Hi. How can I help you?
Hi, Paul. Hi, Paul. This is Paul. I have never heard that acronym for SMART before. What is ANR? It's surveillance, monitoring,
analysis,
AR, and then analysis.
Yeah.
Okay.
Analysis, reporting, and technology. And Patrick Wood, who he cited in the report, is somebody well worth everybody's time and trouble to look up. Patrick Wood, brilliant guy. And he's written, I think he wrote a document or a book about 2 or 3 years ago, maybe a bit longer than that, 2016. There may have been a reprint about all of this technocratic control system. He's very knowledgeable about it. And he does, I think he'll do a show maybe 2 or 3 times a year. So I'm on his podcast loop, but I don't see anything much from him recently. But he's a very good interview. And he's very, very knowledgeable about the nuts and bolts of this process that they're trying to make us undergo. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'll give you 3 guesses who's going to be doing the reporting. Your neighbors, your children, their teachers, the one running the cash register at the grocery store. They're all going to be reporting subversives.
They will. I agree with you. Isn't that how it starts off? I remember, you're right. I remember someone telling me years ago, I may have mentioned it here, even, well, not today, but a few weeks back, that the person you really need to be concerned about is not the people up in so-called national government that we don't have anymore, the ones that are pretending to be a national government, but it's your neighbour. You've got to really watch out. This is why creating strong community relationships right now is a key thing for us all to do. I think it's very important to become on very good terms with your neighbours, because you don't know quite how it's going to go. I mean, look what happened in East Germany. And of course, when that was all going on in East Germany and Russia, over here, when I was in my 20s and 30s or whatever, back in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s, we all said, oh, that's just awful and evil and it will never happen here. Hello. It's happening.
Yeah. Right. All politics is local. Okay, if you have the backing and the agreement of your neighbors, you might actually be able to find that 1 or 2 that is in local government that really isn't sure they like what's going on. But if you guys don't get together, you're not going to have the connections to be able to do that.
That's right. Yeah. I tried to do my connecting. We tried to do some connecting the other night. I actually got to go out and eat out. This sounds ridiculous that I say such a thing, right? But my life is quite restricted. So to go out and actually eat in a restaurant, that's the first time I've done that for about two years. I'm serious. An awful long time. I'm a housebound sort of guy, not by choice, but because of circumstances. And so it's been a bit difficult to go out and have those moments. But we ended up round a round table. And it really worked. It was a much more energized sort of gathering than when we're at an oblong table. So we've all decided that it's round tables from now on. The conversation flowed so much faster. And we were discussing some wonderful things, the benefits of nicotine. And I was banging on then, even the other night, about the French Revolution, because it's what I've got in my pipe right now. It's what I'm smoking. There'll be something else in a few weeks' time. But, you go with what you're actually absorbed with at the time, don't you? And try and see merit in it. But yeah, the idea that your next door neighbour is going to be the one that you have to really watch is unsettling, but it's also true. But maybe it's a great opportunity to build up, as you were saying, local politics. It's a phrase I've heard, all politics is local, but people are politically inert, including me, I'm sort of like the whole idea of the word politics is repellent, isn't it, if you're thinking things through. But it could well be that our resistance, our best form, not that I like, I've just used the word that I don't like doing, but our best way forward is to strengthen ourselves locally everywhere. Here in England, it would be in the form of parishes. There's about 11,000 of them, and or the counties. We have about 50. I think in the States you've got, how many counties do you have? 3,500 or something? Is it something like that?
Something like that, yes.
Yeah.
If you just look at what they've tried to do, they did social distancing, which is anything but social. They're trying to separate people so they cannot speak face to face, so they can put distance between them, so the AI cameras can do the facial recognition on them. They were working on figuring out whether AI could still identify somebody with a face diaper on, and they've all but eliminated the local gatherings, the local community, like block parties and people hanging out at the park for picnics. They don't want people gathering purely by virtue of the fact that's what they're afraid of. That's exactly what we should be doing.
Yes, you're right. I think I mentioned a few weeks ago, we had a guy over here writing lots of intelligent, wonderful things about economics and all sorts of things, called Hilaire Belloc. And he used to, where I am in England, which is in the southern bit, not far from me, were his stomping grounds. He was a good friend of G.K. Chesterton, so I've read a lot of stuff by them. And they appeal to me very much because they're addressing what I consider to be a wholesome view of England. And they're aware of all the problems at the time. And we're talking about an England of 120 years ago. It's unfortunately very, very different. And there's a pub near me called the Frankland Arms, which happened to be Belloc's local boozer, as we would call it over here. It's where he went a lot. It's still there. It's a wonderful building. But he said something along the lines of, he said, England, if you lose your pubs, you'll lose the country, the nation. And they've been warped out of all sort of, they're not like they used to be. If you'd have come to London in the 60s or the 70s or even the 80s, you would have still been going into what I consider to be pubs, which were lively. Of course, everybody was smoking like a train, so you'd have to be prepared to wash all your clothes the following morning, or maybe you didn't have to do that, I don't know, but they were very lively places, and prone to, you stayed out of the nasty ones, but they were life, they were great, and there was a great energy about them. Now there's a lot of sitting down, a lot of meals and stuff like that. I'm not against that, I had one there the other night, but that kind of quality has gone, and the prices have gone up, and they're struggling like mad. I don't know what the closure rate is, but they're major connection points.
It's
and
huge.
I think, they're huge. I mean, what do you have over there in the States then? Bars? I mean, are bars operating the same way? I don't really know.
Yeah, the bars operate the same way, but we have like little taverns. I mean, there are bars and people show up and they basically split off into their own little cohesive groups, 3, 4, or 5 at one table, and they really don't interact with anybody else. But then there's the taverns. There's the neighborhood, like beer and hamburger joints, where everybody knows everybody. People float around the room. They They interact socially. Topics of conversation. There's typically not a lot of noise or not very loud music there. So it's an actual social club with bubbly on the table in front of you. And those were typically owned by families and private businesses, and they got hit really, really hard with the lockdowns. And many of them were just operating from week to week to begin with. And COVID just signed their death warrant, really. A lot of them have closed.
Yeah, we've had a lot of that over here too. I suppose it's everywhere, I guess, something like that. I mean, there's a thing that's developed over here called standing in the park. Not that I've gone and stood in the park, but I know people that do. It's like a movement that began up, if movement's the right word, a series of sort of meetings that started on Sunday mornings, I think typically around about 10 or 11 o'clock, all over the place, where people who suddenly sense there's something really rotten in Denmark, in the state of Denmark, to paraphrase Shakespeare, something was really bad. And so they began to just connect, and I've bumped into quite a few of those people, which has been really encouraging and interesting. And so there's a lot of activity going on. Possibly I sometimes come across saying, well, there's not much going on, and this, that, and the other, but that's not true. There's a lot of things going on. I guess we're still looking for this way to get to get the other side to just go quiet. Back down.
Wake up.
Wake up. Or be decent, But I'm not holding my breath on that. I mean, there's no track record of them ever thinking about doing their job for us. That's not what they do. There's a totally different mentality, and culture has been created over there. And it's just, it's completely out of order. I mentioned actually a few weeks ago with regards to the same sort of tactics. They did this in England after World War II. So when the squaddies came back, 46, 47, 48, 49, that kind of period, they were not happy. They were very unhappy. And these were men that, of course, had been through war and had lost comrades and this, that, and the other, and had seen rough stuff. And they used to meet in folk clubs throughout England at the time. And the talk really was, they came back to nothing, of course. So you can see the intensity of the situation was shorter and more compressed than. That's why they're exposing us over a longer period of time, nibble, 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 all the time with this stuff, like slowly boiling the frog analogy, which is absolutely true. But these guys were talking about overthrowing the government literally. And so they were not to be dismissed, because these are people who'd lost a lot and didn't have much else left to lose, and they'd been through war, and maybe they'd been injured and recovered, so they knew what it was going to be like, and therefore it didn't hold the same dread for them as possibly and probably and intelligently it does for people like us. I'm not saying that this is the route through. It has to be sort of different, because obviously on their side they've got all this advanced technology that they're just itching to use, one would think, to show off about. But it's probably not as straightforward as that either. There has to be some sort of fight back and give back in those circles. But that's what they did. They changed. You were saying that they put these bars out of business over in your neck of the woods, or they suffered badly. They changed the taxation policy around folk clubs, and suddenly the price of beer went up, or they did something to the rates on the land. I can't remember exactly what it was, because I was given a sort of account of this. And it literally made them unviable, so they all began to close. So the actual meeting point, the connection point in the local community was not there anymore.
Right.
And that's how they diffused it. They sent their agents out into all these folk clubs, and they came back with reports.
I've got an idea. Let's promote the stand in the park idea and infuse into it walk in the woodlands, because the greatest energy on this planet that still remains is the trees grabbing the energy from the ether and the conduit to the ground.
Yeah.
So it's a walk in the woodlands. That's a great idea. I think, you know what? I think I'm actually going to do that.
What, now?
Maybe today.
I suppose you can.
Maybe today.
It's funny you mentioned, I got something about trees today, because they're talking all about, all this microwave stuff and everything. Actually, something I'd like to ask you with regards to, wasn't there an emergency broadcast brouhaha or something?
Yes.
Was it yesterday? Was it yesterday or today? I can't remember. When was it?
yesterday. It was 2:22, and all the Patriot communities were suggesting that people turn off their phones, put them into microwaves, put them in EMF bags and things like that. Well, I like to think that my life is pretty clean. Okay, I like to think that I'm pretty careful about what I put in my body and what I subject my skin suit to. So I consciously decided not to turn off my phones. I had all my Wi-Fi's going. I had my computers going, my phones, my tablets. I had everything on because I figure if what I have done was not sufficient to save my bacon when I had advance notice, what's going to happen 4 days later when they flip the switch in the middle of the night and don't say anything about it?
Yeah, no, it's right. I mean, I've often thought about, I thought about this one, and I think there have been other forewarnings of something not good about to happen, and you must do this, that, and the other. I think the warning process is the process. I don't think it's the event. It doesn't even have to take place. I think the idea of being gaslit, they're going to do this, when? In 3 weeks' time? Oh, my God. That stuff, all of that, the unbalancing of people around, are they going to do it? Are they not going to do it? Let's all talk about it. It's understandable that you would, because we don't know we can't trust anything that they say. And of course, they're not lying all the time. They have to throw a little bit of truth in every now and again. Otherwise, it just gets preposterous, probably even for them. I don't know. But I've thought that the pre-information gaslighting process is the psyop. It's not the actual supposed event. It's that state that you're put into prior to the event is what they're after. Getting people off balance for 2 weeks. It's coming up in 2 weeks' time. Oh, they all talk about that and forget about something else. Something gets blown up, buried on page 95, something like that. Whatever they're up to, all this kind of stuff. I mean, we can't stay on top of it. Who'd want to? I mean, it's such a mad life that they lead. But I like what you did, Paul. There, I think that's very sensible. And you're probably stubborn and just want to do things like that. I mean, I'd probably respond in a similar way. I don't know.
No, not quite. I refuse to live in fear.
Mm-hmm.
That is what they want. They want us to be in fear. They want us to second guess our own language, but through self-censorship. And I know you and I are on exactly the same page with that.
Yeah.
And they want us to fear. They want us to feel horrible just because we watch the evening news, just because of everything they give to us. They want us to rat on our neighbors. They want us to suspect everyone. They want us to distrust humanity in general. They want us to go completely away from everything that it means to be human, and I refuse.
Yes, I do. I'm almost stupidly buoyant and happy when I meet people. Intentionally, it's like an act. I go, well, how do I want to act? Do I want to act like this, as though everything's really bad? I don't do that. I've become actually sort of very jolly when I'm out at the supermarket, my only contact point with other human beings, watching them put more and more sort of checkers in and scanning equipment and all this kind of other stuff, and discontinuing my favorite lines of food, like coconut oil has disappeared from my local supermarket. I'm very cross about that. It's these little things and they're doing this stuff as well to disrupt you. But being buoyant and positive, what can you do? I mean, it's a bit like, I used to say that thing, the Titanic situation. It's like moving deck chairs on the Titanic. And of course, it's appropriate. Yeah, we need to we need to get up on the bridge and turn it around. Actually, we need to not run into the iceberg in the first place. Oh, that's already happened, that kind of stuff. So if it's that bad, I actually would move the deck chairs. And I'd go, well, I'm going to get a good deck chair and I'm going to get a large gin and tonic. And if we're all going down, at least I've got a nice drink and a good chair when it happens. I don't know what else I'm supposed to do,
And a ringside seat.
Yeah, why not?
I may die in a few minutes, but boy, look at that view.
Look at that view. And this is a fantastic drink. And I'm, yeah. There's a Zen story along those lines. You've reminded me, there's one of these, these Zen stories, which are always mockable from a certain perspective, but they're also useful. There's a guy running along a hilltop being chased by a tiger, and he gets to the end, and there's a precipice looking down, there's a drop of 40 feet, and you think, oh my God. And so he turns around, he sees this tiger coming at him, and he looks down at the bottom, he says, I'll jump off. And there's a tiger at the bottom as well. So he jumps off, and as he's falling, he passes a strawberry bush, and he gets hold of a strawberry and eats it, and he goes, what a lovely strawberry. It's the same thing. That's it. Sorry, there's no punchline. That's it. It's the tigers and the strawberry story. So, yeah. So maybe if we're all plummeting, look out for that strawberry bush and grab one. You might as well at least enjoy a strawberry before it all goes splat or whatever. But I actually don't feel that. I'm making a joke of it. I don't think that's quite the way these things are going to unfold at the moment. So, and I think it's also causing us as a people in all our different nations to get more creative. I was out with these people the other night, and they were actually quite excited about the trouble that we're in, which I thought was really rather encouraging. They said, "Isn't it an amazing time to be alive?" I said, "Well, amazing's one word to describe it. Yeah, I suppose it definitely is." And you see this culmination of so many prophecies, if you want to look into that area as well, which you should. I mean, we ought to look into every single area that we can, and I know many people are. So there's a great deal, being brought back to the table for us all to digest and run through. So yeah, wonderful. Paul, what we'll have to do, Paul, because you're persistently calling in and improving the show, is that we'll have to talk afterwards about maybe working you into the show in a more. It's great talking to you about these things and getting a US perspective. Here I am in jolly old England. As you know, we're all very, very happy all the time over here. We're very merry.
Well, I think that would be fun. And, if I could just share anything with your audience, the only thing you can do is keep your head up, your eyes open, and your heart as happy as you can, and just go through life.
Yeah, someone wrote Paul v. Paul in one of the chat spaces. I saw it, so there you go. Although we're getting on famously, aren't we? So it's pretty good. And maybe I could set a rule that if you're not called Paul, you better not call in it because it's going to get confusing, So everybody's got to be called Paul from now on. There's a surfeit of Pauls. I suspect you were probably born around about the same time I was. Let's not go into that because it's too embarrassing for both of us. But my mum, I just think a lot of people were called Paul because their mothers were in love with Paul Newman or something like that. It's very strange. And I told my mum a lot. I said, couldn't you have called me something else? She said, it's a really nice name, or whatever she said, because your mum gives it to you, so she loves the name. She said, why don't you like the name? I said, I can't do anything with it. I mean, what can you do with it? You can't abbreviate it. Pa. It's just ridiculous. And the only other thing is Paulie, which is really bad. And I'm not an Italian gangster from New Jersey. I'm not called Paulie. Right. I don't know anything about that. Those are the only ones that look tough, aren't they? So all my other mates, they just had, Williams, you get so many names, don't you? Get Will, William, Wills, Bill, Billy. Fantastic. 5 or 6 names there, straight off the bat. So very useful. Anyway, never mind, Mum, I forgive you. So,
well, with respect to me, I was named after the Apostle Paul.
Well, I think I was too then. I'll claim that one. It's a little bit more elevated, isn't it? Yeah. And maybe we'll talk about the Apostle Paul later on. Another man I would suggest misunderstood. But that's a bigger tale to go into. But we'll get into that. We've got plenty of time going forward. Wonderful.
Yes, we do.
You can hang around if you like, Paul.
20 minutes.
Yeah, I've got a clip or two. I've got another clip to play, actually. That was very interesting from that Canadian guy. So surveillance monitor analysis, reporting and technology. Learned listeners will, of course, be familiar with that, but that's what a smart city is. It's for them. It's not for you. And also, I don't know if you caught it the other week, I was talking about this abomination, this architectural abomination called the Line out in Saudi Arabia, which is 175 kilometers long. It's just 500 meters high, 200 meters wide, and will house 9 million inmates. That's my word. They say people, happy families, they say. These people who wouldn't even know what that means.
Oh, goody.
Yeah, it's absolute junk. I mean, it really is. It's just, they were saying things like, it's got timeless appeal because it's clad in glass and steel. I mean, what? That's not even a sentence. I mean, it just doesn't even make any sense at all. What they should have said, it's after Jeremy Bentham's prison designs. Everybody can see everybody else. We've got the whole thing. He designed it. I forgot the name of it. Opticon or something. A prison which he designed. Bentham was a foul creature, certainly from the other side as far as I'm concerned. And he designed this prison where you could see every inmate from just one central point in the middle of it. He thought that this was fun.
Yep.
They think it's great to design these things. Well, the Line is that, and they've started building this thing. And it's so there's your surveillance, your monitoring, your analysis, your reporting, and your technology, everyone. Let's all go live in Saudi Arabia, all 9 million of us. And you'll never need to go outside again. Actually, you've got me rolling now. So there's adverts on have you got a lot of these in the States? It'd be interesting to share notes. We have ads running here on TV, a lot of them, about improving the comfort of the home, almost to excess. As if you're going to have this and you're going to have that. In fact, the clip I've got coming up is about that. It's about 5 minutes long. Have I got time to play it? Yeah, I do. We've still got about 20 minutes to go. So I'm going to cover that. In fact, I'm going to play it now, Paul. So if you want to hang around here in this space and hear it this way, that's great. Maybe we talk about it afterwards. Let me just play this. There's a newspaper over here. A broadsheet, a quality daily, although I don't know whether it actually still goes out as a physical newspaper, called the Daily Telegraph. It's long-standing and it's supposed to be conservative, although these terms don't really mean too much anymore. Anyway, recently, from their department, they released a 5-minute video. You're only going to get the audio here, but it doesn't really matter. The video's what counts. The audio's what counts. Let's listen to this. This is a 5-minute pitch from the Telegraph, selling you on the idea of a fully automated life and how great it is, even though no one wants it. No one wants this garbage. Here we go.
It's part of the human condition to imagine what the future might look like. Years ago, science fiction writers like Arthur C. Clarke dreamed and future-gazed, mapping out exactly what 2020 might be like.
The big difference when he grows up, in fact, if we wanted to wait for the year 2001, is that he will have in his own house not a computer as big as this, but at least a console through which you can talk to his friendly local computer and get all the information you need in the course of living in a complex modern society. This will be in a compact form in his own house.
Our lives have changed so dramatically in the first 20 years of this millennium. But what will our domestic life in 2030 look like? What smart devices will be at the heart of our homes? And with assistive tech supporting us in our daily tasks, will there come a time when we never need to leave the house? We hear of things like the Internet of Things informing the stocking of our fridges and freezers, but this is hiding the real story of how we'll adopt such smart technologies. We've already invited extraordinary machine learning devices into our homes. 22% of UK households have one or more smart speakers, while the number of IoT-connected devices worldwide is projected to almost triple to 30.9 billion units by 2025. Yes, most of us only use an Alexa or Google Nest to listen to music, the radio, or play silly jokes with. But behind the scenes, big tech aims to make these products central to how our homes run.
So the companies behind smart speakers, or they're called now digital assistants, are actually trying to transform them. So they're not digital assistants anymore, but more sort of household managers or household brains that actually can control a whole network of other devices inside your home. The likes of Apple and Amazon are trying to integrate their smart devices so they work with kind of automatic hoovers that will basically work on their own. They'll map out the inside of your home. Now, whoever is in charge of household chores is going to be totally liberated from having to do that, because they won't have to spend hours hoovering. They'll just be able to get an automatic vacuum to do it instead. That will mean a big change for a lot of people. NVIDIA are basically working on developing this sort of quite large, giant robot arm that will live in your kitchen. It can help you open drawers, it can put things away, so it will map out where everything lives in your kitchen, and the idea will probably be that it can tidy up after you, or it can even do the cooking and then tidy up. That would mean you probably wouldn't even have to be in your kitchen. It might just serve food out of a kind of porthole that you never have to even enter, and obviously that would transform everybody's houses.
In the future, this sensor-led technology will likely be built right into the structures of our homes. Smart modular housing developments are starting to emerge as the viable, planet-friendly option for home buyers and construction firms alike.
So I guess the real advantage with smart homes is they'll be able to monitor everything. So they'll be able to monitor how much energy you're using, how much water you're using, and that sort of ability to essentially put sensors around your kind of everyday tasks. That will mean you'll be able to see where am I wasting energy and water, and then you'll be able to take steps to combat that. I mean, that could have a big impact on Britain trying to meet its net zero targets.
But this is just the beginning. Smart technology is beginning to reshape the way in which entire cities are inhabited. Around the world, cities are deploying sensors to track footfall, litter and air pollution.
While we're seeing smart homes kind of making leaps and bounds at the moment, I think somewhere where it's actually kind of a bit more advanced is also smart cities. So councils have really noticed the potential here. Smart homes and smart cities are going to be integrated into the future, and that's going to make big changes.
In Sunderland, bins fitted with sensors can tell the council when they're full. And in China, sensors combined with facial recognition can detect individuals who are jaywalking and display their faces on screens to shame them. And intelligent tech is beginning to shape the way we may shop IRL in the future. In early 2021, Amazon opened its first high street supermarket in West London. Based on its successful rollout in the US, this shop uses advanced sensor technology to track the contents of your actual in-store shopping basket in real time, updating your account spending as you shop and billing you once you've left the store.
I think definitely Amazon wants it to be a high street revolution, and one of the reasons that they're creating this supermarket, and they've also just opened a new hair salon in London, this is not just so Amazon can use the technology, but it's so it can sell it to other people. I'm sure in the very near distance we'll see kind of those big supermarket chains also experimenting or integrating it into their own stores.
In the 21st century, data is the most valuable resource in the world, more so even than oil. And when used alongside smart technology and machine learning, this data will be key in the reimagining of how we live both inside and outside of the home in 2030.
Wow. Impressed, Paul? Are you in?
They hit all the hot buttons. They hit the Agenda 2030. They got that. They also got the nanny state, waited on hand and foot digitally or any other way.
Yeah.
They've really hit the laziness and lack of accountability hot button. I won't have to do it. My house will.
I'm not going to do it. I know. The only bit I liked was the bit about a thing that cleaned things up, but I don't want anything cooking for me. And then I thought, I don't really want people cleaning up, because isn't being messy sort of part of one of the great joys in life? Certainly one of my sons thinks so. I think he's almost world champion at the moment. It's absolutely remarkable, really. He's so happy about it. What do you think about tidying? Yeah, I'll do that. Maybe that's the approach as well, I've thought. The adolescent, actually they're not adolescents anymore, but the kind of, that thing, you must have it over there, right? The disinterested teenager, where you ask them to do things, they go, yeah, I'll do it. But months go by. Is that maybe an approach that we should take? Yeah, we're going to comply with all that. See ya. Yeah, and we just never comply with it. What I'm interested with that clip, and it's not unique, they're phrasing them all. I like that little phrase where she said IRL, in real life, as if in real life is a subset of the computer world, which of course for them, for us, it's going to be. Oh yeah, you're going to live in your box, in the line, and all this stuff will be done for you. In fact, basically, there's no point you even being alive, because we can get all this stuff done without you living. It's as if they don't know what's the point of being alive. The point of being alive is to struggle, isn't it? If all the struggle is removed, I know that sounds mad. It's not actually the point of life. But without struggle, how are you to grow? But of course, they don't understand that, because apparently you haven't got a soul, I suppose, according to them. I mean, they're just sort of techno bonkers, aren't they? What do you think?
Human beings, in the lack of challenge, in the face of lack of challenges, they don't grow. They don't expand. They don't enhance their own existence. They've taken the joy out of life.
Well, they have. They're trying to. But if we hang around here doing these shows and cracking foul, politically incorrect jokes from time to time, which we might work our way up to once I find out what the limits are, then we can have as much joy as we like. I mean, laughing at them is key, and it's very difficult not to at times. I mean, they want to be taken seriously, don't they? But some of the guff that's in that presentation, I'll probably stick it in the Telegram group. So for those of you who are following me on Telegram, there's a link on paulenglishlive.com. I'll stick that clip in, so you'll be able to see the video and get it in all its 3D wonderful glory to do this. And of course, they always have these kindly ladies' voices. as if, what's this?
Yes.
Isn't it lovely? And she's very polite and very English and wonderfully clear with her enunciation. Hello. And everything's going to be marvellous. And what could you possibly want to worry about? Well, I just thought maybe living. What happens if I start to smell a bit? Is there going to be a robot that stops me smelling and stuff like this? It's as if everything is it's anemic. The whole process is ridiculous. We actually want to, we've got to go out and get covered in mud, don't we? Haven't we got to do that? We've got to get covered in mud. We've got to stand in the earth, and we need to stand under the sun and hear the rain fall. And this is, I've banged on about these things a bit up to now, but this process of being connected with beauty, which is where I started off really with this image from Majority right at the beginning of the show, those clouds in there do something. They do something to me. They might not to you, but they do something to me. I get lost looking at clouds and things like that and his other paintings, and I'm not alone. It's not just him. There are other illustrators, Gustave Doré and these others. I mentioned it earlier on. And as I'm doing these shows, I'm reminding myself of other things that I'm in love with. Somebody actually, because I'd done a little posting about this in the Telegram group, sent me, and I'm going to get some clips from this possibly for next week, that he shuffled off this mortal coil a few years ago, a gentleman called Roger Scruton, Scruton. Yes, it's a name where giggles could possibly arise, but when you hear him talk and see his manner, he was a wonderful man, and he was a philosopher here in the UK, and he had tenure, I don't know, Yale or somewhere like that, a major university over there in your neck of the woods. And he did this show about 10, 12 years ago, which I caught at the time, about an hour, called On Beauty. And it was about... He starts off, I haven't seen it for years, but he starts off, he's in the Victoria and Albert Museum looking at things, and he said, if you'd gone back 100 years ago and asked anybody from the layman to the highest in the land, what was the purpose of art? What was it for? They would have all told you it was for beauty. It was to bring beauty into the world. And of course, modern art doesn't really do that, does it? In fact, it's not right to even call it art, because if it's not bringing beauty into the world, I'm just one of those old traditionalists, one of those guys, who, when he sees these chaps going around talking complete blather in front of these Rothko paintings and this other bilge, like most of Picasso's output, which is Picasso's a tragedy. He could paint brilliantly by the time he was 14, and then he just started painting garbage because they used to give him money to do that. You can't take this stuff seriously, and I'm going to dig some clips out from it, particularly I know there's an interview with a sculptor in there. I'll get the audio from this because it's absolutely wonderful, about 4 or 5 minutes. I'll tell you now, and I'll go over it again next week because it's worth repeating. He goes into his studio, and I don't know where it is, but I want to go there if this guy's still alive, because you go in and the first thing you see is this sort of statue of this Greek figure in the classical style that must be 15 feet high. And I just went, wow. I just had a wow as I saw it. It's just one of those, what's that all about? It's not a thing to be analysed. You have an emotion. Something comes over you when you're in the presence of and someone doing that. And this guy's analysis of modern art, which I'm not going to cover now because I'll get the clip for next week, is brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. And I guess you might have to see that too, because he goes around a junkyard pointing things out, and then you suddenly see something strikingly beautiful. And the fact that it's in a junkyard is irrelevant. You just see this thing. He's looking at an old statue. Amazing stuff. So isn't that why we live? Don't we live for that? Don't we live so that we, from time to time, bump into poetic things? And that it's not unmanly to do that, which we've been taught it is, but it is not at all. All these wonderful, beautiful things that have been created. And the line is not one of them.
Right. Well, if I could, I think that the initial response, what is art about? If you asked people decades ago, what is art for? It was a simpler time back then. It was a simplistic time somewhat. And their response would be to bring beauty to the world. But art is so much more than that, because art is intended to not only be pleasing to the eye in some cases, but it is usually to elicit an emotional response, either one of joy or one of sorrow or one of shock. That's what art is designed to do. It's designed to make you feel and to get in touch with emotions that perhaps you've buried because you're too busy with your nose in your smartphone, or too busy punching in, out, or waiting until your next coffee break.
Yeah.
It's about living.
It is. And it's about reaching out, I think, to God. However people want to conceptualize that or think about that is massively important. All the wonderful buildings, the things that we remember, as it were, that our forefathers did, in so many cases, they are about them being inspired by that, by the not knowingness and reaching for something and creating beautiful things. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's just, and what you say is spot on. It is absolutely about those things. I think I was talking maybe to you earlier in the week with regards to Michelangelo's statue of David, which I'd seen a sort of documentary on earlier in the week, and it was the size of it. They had someone there, yeah. And you don't realize how big it is. And then they said Michelangelo's head came up midway to the thigh, and I'm going, wow, and it's perfect. He's doing this thing that's 2 times bigger than a normal man, or something, maybe 3 times bigger, and everything on it is just, it's incredible. It's absolutely incredible. And, we could never do that today. Yeah, we could. We just need to rechange what we think is important. It could be done. People, those great talents could be given a chance. Of course, they're buried and the garbage is promoted instead, because this, that, and the other. And in fact, I realize I've got some more anecdotes about the modern art world to tell. We'll do it now because we're kind of short on time. But I think next week I'll probably incorporate that one in, and we'll have a look at that aspect of cultural destruction, and also, therefore, the other side, which you're touching upon and we're talking about here, this amplification of bringing beauty back into our lives. I mean, I'm with Dostoevsky. Beauty will save the world. Actually, it might not save the world, but it will save our world, I suggest, as a people, very much. It's going to be a massive contributing factor.
Yes, it will be. As long as people get back in touch with their emotions, if they remember they're human, feel something, go outside, get dirty, have fun. It's good for you.
It is. It's very good. It's very, very good. We're coming up to the last couple of minutes of the show, Paul, so there'll be a little tune kicking in a few seconds' time. I'm just going to do a little bit of sort of shout-outs. And if you didn't catch it earlier on, although you probably did, this last hour has been going out through the usual outlets, but also we've bolted on. I've been invited onto this show, is now part of the WBN324.com station, which I'm thrilled about. So if you've joined and heard this and liked this or whatever, great, wonderful. It's been great to be with you, even though, of course, that's a metaphorical thing because I'm talking in my hut in the south of England. But it's been great to be here and to begin this sort of new process and to get things going. Paul, it's been great that you turned up and added
pleasure.
The first bit of dialogue I've had in 4 or 5 weeks, which is fine. It's okay. It's been really, really good. So that's been very good. Oh, there's the outro music. So we've got about a minute to go as we just wind down. I'd like to thank everybody that's contributed. Oh, by the way, there was something else I wanted to mention. Somebody called Giuseppe said Panopticon over on Odyssey. Absolutely right. The prison that was designed by Bentham was called the Panopticon. I knew it was ad opti in it somewhere. So that shows you how their minds work. You have to see all these sorts of things. Wonderful. Okay, we're kind of out of here. We're down to the last 40 or 50 seconds. Thank you, everybody, for being here this week. Next week, we're at 8 p.m. UK time, 3 p.m. Eastern, 2 p.m. Central, 1 p.m. Mountain, and midday Pacific. So we're just an hour later, but we're still on for 2 hours. And things are moving along quite nicely. Paul, it's been wonderful having you along. I'll be in touch. And thanks very much, everyone, for listening. Bye for now.